Hey there, and welcome to a deep dive into becoming an environmental protection manager.
It's a pretty important job.
Yeah, it is, and we know you're interested in this career path, so we read through RoleCatcher's career guide to bring you all the info.
Definitely a career path that's only becoming more and more important
For sure.
as the world is really waking up to how important protecting the environment is.
hmm
So people like you are going to be super important for creating a more sustainable future.
Yeah, so let's talk about what these managers actually do.
Yeah.
Because you know you're going to be more than just a tree hugger, right? You're
Yeah.
going to be advising policymakers on environmental regulations.
Exactly. You'll
Yeah.
be right there analyzing data, trying to see what the risks are to our ecosystems.
It's like being an environmental detective.
Yeah, basically. And you're trying to figure out, you know, is the water supply going to be okay? What's climate change going to do to this area?
So interesting.
Yeah, you're tackling those big questions.
And don't forget about the manager part of being an environmental protection manager. This isn't just research and analysis.
Right.
The guide talks about how you'll be leading campaigns to promote sustainable waste management and, protecting our green spaces,
Yeah, you'll see your work have a real impact on the world around you.
which is what we like.
Exactly. And it's not a solo job either. You're going to be working with so many different people,
Oh, really?
government agencies, people in the community, even big leaders in industry,
Wow.
all to make a difference.
And that takes a lot of people's skills.
It does.
Communication, negotiation.
It's all about collaboration, but when it works, it's really rewarding.
So it sounds like a job with a ton of responsibility, but also a lot of satisfaction.
Definitely.
And I know you mentioned you want a career where you can see that you're making a difference.
Right.
And the guide really highlights how this job has high job satisfaction because you know you're making a real impact.
Absolutely. And it's important to love what you do, especially when you think about some of the tougher parts of this job. You know, dealing with really complex challenges sometimes on a time crunch.
That makes sense, though, because we were talking about the planet here.
Exactly.
These are high stakes.
It can definitely be stressful.
And the field is always changing, too.
Yeah,
So I imagine you always have to be learning as an environmental protection manager.
absolutely. And you have to be okay with that. You know, what we think is the best way to do something today might not be the best way tomorrow.
Right.
So you're constantly learning and adapting, and the rules and regulations change all the time too, so you got to keep up.
We've talked about what they do and what the job is like overall.
Yeah.
But what about actually getting the job
Right.
and building a career out of it?
Yeah.
So the guy talked about 4 stages of a career in this field:
Okay.
assistant specialist, coordinator, and then manager.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you start with the foundational stuff, and then you get more responsibility and leadership as you move up.
And they give you examples of what you would actually be doing at each of those levels.
They do.
So you can really see what it looks like to progress in your career.
Like starting as an assistant and doing data collection, and then working your way up to managing a team.
Exactly.
And to climb that ladder, continuous learning is key.
For sure.
I read that if you get advanced degrees and certifications, it makes you stand out more.
Yeah, like the EIA,
What's that stand for again?
environmental impact assessments.
Right.
And then there's the EMS,
What's that one?
environmental management systems.
Okay.
Those can really help your resume stand out in a competitive job market.
Yeah, I bet. And it's not all about degrees and stuff.
Yeah,
It's about who you know.
it's about networking.
Networking, exactly.
Going to conferences, joining professional groups.
Yeah.
Those are great ways to meet people who are already doing what you want to do,
Yeah.
and maybe even find jobs you didn't know about.
That's awesome. So you've got the passion, the education, and the drive.
Hmm.
But who are you actually working with as an environmental protection manager?
Yeah, that's a great question.
The guide talks about all these different people that you'd be collaborating with.
And it's a pretty diverse group, I'm telling you.
Okay.
We're talking government officials, policymakers, people in industry, and even just everyday people.
Wow. So it's a very public-facing role.
It can be. Yeah, you're protecting the environment for everybody, right?
That's true.
So you need to be able to work with everybody.
So let's break it down a bit.
Okay.
You said government officials. What does that actually look like?
So think about presenting your research, you know,
Like a board.
yeah, like to a town council, or even advocating for some new environmental protection law
Oh,
at
wow.
a national level even.
So you might have to go to Congress.
You never know. It depends on what kind of work you're doing.
That's so cool.
And your communication skills are really important here.
I bet.
You can't just be a scientist. You got to make sure that everybody understands what you're talking about, even if they don't have a science background.
So it's about making it make sense for everybody.
Exactly. And then there are the policymakers,
Okay.
the people who are actually writing the laws and the regulations.
So important.
Yeah, you need to understand how the whole system works
Mm-hmm.
and be able to explain how different policies are going to affect the environment and the people, too.
So are there ever disagreements,
Oh, yeah,
with people disagreeing on how to actually protect the environment?
totally.
What happens then?
Well, remember we were talking about the downsides of the job.
Yeah.
Conflict can definitely be one of them. Like,
Okay.
imagine you've got a community that's worried about pollution,
Mm-hmm.
but you've also got a company that's saying, hey, we're creating jobs here.
Right. It's hard to balance those two things.
It is. And as an environmental protection manager, you might be stuck in the middle trying to find a compromise.
So you need to be able to see all sides.
Exactly. You got to be a good listener and a really good communicator.
That's a good point.
And then on top of all that, you've got the industry folks to work with.
So this is like companies and stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this could be anything from helping them make their operations more eco-friendly
Okay.
to making sure they're following all the environmental regulations.
So it's like you're working with them to find solutions.
Exactly. It's a team effort.
That's pretty cool.
And it can be really rewarding to see a company actually taking steps to reduce their impact.
Yeah, I bet.
And then we can't forget about working with the public.
Right, because at the end of the day, we're protecting the planet for people.
Exactly.
And what does that look like?
It could be anything from giving presentations on recycling
Okay.
to organizing like a volunteer day to clean up a park.
Fun.
Yeah. And you might even find yourself just answering questions from people who want to learn more.
Like being an educator.
Totally. You're helping people understand why the environment matters.
I like it.
And building trust with the community is so important.
It is, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together.
Exactly. We've all got to do our part to protect the planet.
Okay, so we've talked about all these different people you'd be working with, but what about the actual work? What are you doing to protect the environment?
Well, the guide talks about a few key strategies.
Yeah.
One that really stands out is something called an environmental impact assessment.
What is that?
It sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty simple.
Okay.
It's basically a way to figure out how something like a new development project
Okay.
would affect the environment.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so you do this assessment before anything is built or any decisions are made.
So you can catch problems early on.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And the assessment looks at everything from air and water quality
Right.
to wildlife habitats, noise pollution, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
And then based on the findings,
Yeah.
you make recommendations to minimize any negative impacts.
Like what kind of recommendations?
Well, it could be anything from suggesting different building materials
Okay.
to recommending ways to reduce pollution.
You're coming up with solutions.
Exactly. You're using your expertise to make sure that we're developing sustainably.
I love that.
And another big part of the job is making sure that everyone is following the rules.
So you're talking about environmental laws and regulations.
Exactly.
Say-
And this part of the job can be pretty hands-on.
How so?
Well, you might find yourself conducting inspections.
Of like companies and stuff?
Exactly, to make sure they're complying with all the environmental regulations.
So you're like an environmental police officer.
Kind of, but you're also there to educate and help businesses do the right thing.
That makes sense.
And of course, if there are any violations, you'll need to know how to handle those too.
So you need a good understanding of environmental law.
Absolutely. It's essential for this role.
This is all so fascinating.
Right.
It's definitely not a boring job.
Not at all. There's always something new to learn and new challenges to tackle.
So for someone who loves to be in the thick of it,
Yeah.
this seems like the perfect career.
I think so too. And luckily, the guide breaks everything down into manageable steps.
That's good.
Yeah, it highlights the key skills and knowledge areas that you need to succeed.
Okay, so let's talk about those skills.
Yeah, let's dive into what makes a truly great environmental protection manager.
So we're moving on to the skills that make a really great environmental protection manager.
Yeah, it takes more than just checking off boxes on a resume, right?
Totally.
It's a mix of being really good at what you do and having a passion for it.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about some of these things already, but the guide really gets into why these skills are so important.
Exactly. Like, remember how we were saying continuous learning is super important? Well, the guide specifically mentions active learning as a key skill.
Active learning. It's got to be more than just, reading a book once a year.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It means you're always looking for new information. You're making connections to what you already know, and then you actually use that new information.
So you're not just learning it, you're applying it.
Exactly. Whether it's some new environmental law or new research study, or even just feedback from the community. You gotta be ready to learn and adapt.
So you're always growing and evolving in this role.
That's the idea. And that actually brings us to another important skill from the guide, critical thinking.
Okay, so what does critical thinking actually mean when we're talking about protecting the environment?
It means you don't just take information at face value. You ask questions, you look for biases, you really examine the evidence and consider different opinions.
So give me an example.
Okay, let's say you're looking at a proposal for a new construction project. A critical thinker wouldn't just skim the environmental impact statement. They would really analyze the data, think about the long-term effects, and maybe even talk to people who have different perspectives.
Wow, so you really got to be thorough.
You do, and you'd be surprised how often those critical thinking skills come into play.
I bet.
And then there's the management side of things, which is a whole other set of skills.
Right, because you're not just working alone in a lab all day.
Exactly. You're leading teams, managing projects, and making sure everything stays on track and on budget.
So organization is key.
Absolutely. And so is leadership.
This career path really does need such a diverse set of skills. It's really interesting.
It is. You need to be analytical and creative, a good communicator, and a strategic thinker.
That's a lot.
It is,
Oh.
but that's what makes it so rewarding. You need to be able to take all that environmental science knowledge and actually apply it to solve real-world problems.
That makes sense.
You've got to be able to communicate those complex ideas to all kinds of people and work effectively with others. It's not just about the science, it's about the people too.
It sounds like you really need to be passionate about this kind of work.
You do, and it sounds like you are. And the guide even says that this field is only going to become more and more important as we deal with things like climate change and pollution.
So the skills and passion you have are going to be in high demand.
Exactly.
Well, this has been amazing. We've covered so much about what it takes to be an environmental protection manager.
I know it's a lot to take in.
It is. But don't worry, the RoleCatcher guide goes into even more detail.
Yeah, they have tons of examples, case studies, and resources to help you decide if this is the right career for you.
Exactly. So if you're feeling inspired, definitely go check out the full guide on RoleCatcher.
It's a great way to take that next step.
It really is. And before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, what is it?
Well, the guide mentioned that environmental protection managers work in all kinds of different industries. So my question to you is, if you could choose any sector to work in which one would it be and why?
That's a great question. What kind of impact do you want to make?
Exactly. It's not just about the career. It's
Yeah.
about finding that perfect fit where you can make a real difference.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring this career path with you.
It has.
And we'll see you next time for another exciting deep dive.